Hi, this is Dr. Jim Porter, and I am going to find out what I'm going to title this video later. I know what I want to talk about, but I also wanted to quickly talk about the fact that I have to keep up with various human science concepts so that I can keep a well-rounded knowledge of the kind of things I talk about. So again, I received my PhD a bunch of years back, received my master's a bunch of years before that, a couple of bachelors before that. But those things can start to wear out. So I think it's the responsibility of all mental health professionals to keep updated on the kind of information that they believe is relevant. I'm going to give you a sample of what I'm reading. And by the way, the fact that I'm reading a lot of things in no way describes that I have a large mental capacity or anything like that. It kind of describes that I need to cycle through different readings to keep myself interested, to keep my attention, and also maybe to process a lot of it, but also to synthesize a lot of it. Think about it in school. You know, most of us grew up having to read a lot of different books in high school at the same time because we have different teachers teaching us math, history, and all that stuff. So that might be shaped in me from that experience. One thing about my orientation, I am a lot more into the concept that people aren't born a certain way and stay that way throughout their life, that we are born not a blank slate, but an amazing palette with which to shape things, except for the fact that our brain is constantly changing with every experience and choice, right? So I'm already broadcasting to you a little bit about what I believe. And what that means is that if your brain can always be changing and it is the cause or the mediator of your personality, of your mental health disorders, and of your other habits and abilities and stuff like that, try not to think that you are aware of what your limits are. It's good to accept your limits, but you can't claim that you know what your limits are. So again, I believe in brain neuroplasticity and the unknown potential and limits that you have, which means that the only way to find out what the limits you have are to continue to try to grow beyond certain limits that you wish to grow beyond and just see what happens, okay? And by the way, there's a lot of science behind me on this. So I'm going to start by talking about a book that I have on my Kindle called She Has Her Mother's Laugh. In fact, I'll show you what the cover looks like. Let's see, how do you do that? You go to, okay, here's how you do it on a Kindle. I love the old Kindles where you just don't have a choice of doing anything but reading. So just please bear with me on this one. Cancel, go to, and then you go way down, and you go to the cover. And here's the black and white version of the cover. She Has Her Mother's Laugh by Carl Zimmer. I love this book. It's very accessible. He talks around a whole lot of things. It's about genetics and what he learned as a science writer from a lot of scientists about genetics, what they mean, what they influence, do they cause, do they determine who you are? And the answer is most likely probably not. I know that from a lot of other understandings of genetics. Genetics have a powerful influence over you, but so do your experiences have a tremendous influence over you. And of course, your experiences and your genetics interact. So you can choose experiences. That's why we send kids to school to learn stuff. Because if you're going to be the way you were born for the rest of your life, we wouldn't bother sending you to school. Parents wouldn't bother trying to raise you in certain ways. This is another interesting book. The book is called The Future of the Mind by Michio Kaku. A lot of you might have heard him on the radio. You might have seen him in YouTube videos. He may have done a couple of TED Talks. I haven't seen him do one. He's very interesting because he's a physicist, I believe, by training, but he explores other areas of science, and he doesn't claim to be a scientist or professional in those other areas. In this one, he dares to go into the world of psychology and stuff like that. And in the past, I've seen him basically take science fiction and use it to make what's going on very exciting now. So he'll say things like, imagine that one day we'll be able to hook your mind up to a tape recorder, download your entire personality, so that when you die, we'll be able to put you in a human machine like a robot, and you'll be actually immortal, because from now on we'll be able to just record who you are and download you after you die into a new body, and so you won't ever have to die. He says things like that, and a lot of that it was interesting to me for a while, and it was irritating after a while, because it made a lot of promises, and then when I saw his book, it made a lot of assumptions. Some of the sentences really didn't describe very clearly what he learned from his own very precisely his own scientific studies and those of his colleagues and a lot of the debates, but he did a pretty good job at introing you to it. So I think he writes a lot of books that get you stimulated to be interested, but I wouldn't take his conclusions as what seem like conclusions. I would say he doesn't want you to think he's coming to conclusions either. I think he's trying to keep exploring. Now, in an old book, he believed that we were going to get things like the brain and the physical universe down to a minuscule kind of a theory, basically represented by a minuscule equation that will basically give us a way to figure out anything in the universe. They called it the unified field theory or the general unified theory. But he seemed to think that we were eventually going to get all the answers, that science was going to get in the answers. In this book, I decided I didn't want to read another book that concluded that. So I read from the last paragraph and then to the paragraph before that, the paragraph, just to see where he was eventually going down the road. I like reading the end and getting all the spoilers so I would know if I want to read it. Well, I do want to read it because it seems like he has a more acceptance of what I think is the mystery of the universe and the mystery of the human brain. And I haven't read the end again in a while, but I've been reading from the beginning now. And he does seem to come to the conclusion that the universe and the way it works is going to keep us mystified forever, or for a very long time, for the foreseeable future of humanity. We're always going to have some unsolved mysteries about the universe. It's so vast and complex that it's going to be very difficult to claim that anyone is the expert on what happens. There will always be room for you to throw your opinion in about how the universe works. And I believe he also understands that consciousness and the human mind, because that's what this book is, the future of the mind. What I remember from reading his conclusions is that the human brain and the human body, and maybe the brain of many living things, are so complex that they are probably going to remain as mysterious as the universe, as the physical universe. So I want to say, realize that you may be vast, you may be unexplainable, and there's so much. I don't want to use potential too often because a lot of psychological gurus do that. We do have our limits. Life is rough, and I don't know if it's ever not going to be rough, but there is so much more to what you can do that's mysterious, that basically you got to choose your path of self-discovery and see what comes of it. And you got to give other people that kind of leeway too. Where I've seen it be a problem that people think we know what a person's limits are, for example, when a teacher presumes to tell someone, you'll never be good at this. When we do psychological testing and we say, I think we found out where your limits are. You've got ADHD and you're never going to be able to learn to pay more attention than this. You're going to have to take pills, and even that's not going to get you beyond a certain place, and that kind of thing. The fact is, it is kind of arrogant for us or others to assume to know what our limits are. So it's kind of our responsibility or our joy to continue exploring. Next one is Making Habits, Breaking Habits by Jeremy Dean. I kind of giving these as recommendations. They're kind of interesting. Tell me what you think about them. Again, I'm not good at reading my comments. I've got a lot to do in this world. Maybe you know what that feels like. This one I'm reading, and what do I think about this? I keep losing my interest in it. I would love it if he gave some step-by-step things and show the research a lot more. But this is rooted in research, and he does talk about the authors, the scientists of the articles that he's read and that sort of thing. I think this guy is pretty much probably an expert on habit, and if you got him down in his office or whatever and talked to him, you'd learn a lot. He may be a therapist. He may be, I don't really know. I think he's more of a, I don't know what he is. But anyway, the point is, I think he knows his stuff. I just think sometimes the way he explains it, I would say, doesn't charge me up about trying the methods. There are a couple of times when it does, but I think continuing to read about habits is also continuing to read about change. Because I would say a lot of your mental disorders or whatever hangups you have in life or the relationship issues comes down to habit. Comes down to the 18 years training you got as a child of having to deal with the environment you grew up in. You developed a ton of habits upon a ton of habits, and it's a beautiful life quest to try to see which ones of those you can adjust, change, disassemble, and reassemble into something new. So again, I think mental health is a lot more learned than people believe. And I don't mean just mental health, I just mean living life and some of the things about your responses to other people and how you explain them away by blaming other people or thinking that, thinking that things are too locked in place. Learning that there are ways to um, amend your habits, not just behavioral, but your emotional habits and your internal thinking habits is very liberating. And by the way, what you're going to do most likely is you're going to read a lot of things from experts and you're going to actually piggyback. You're going to leapfrog over them and realize that you can apply new knowledge suggested by what you're reading about them that they might have never thought of, by the way. And you're going to try to apply it to your life and you're going to come and find out all kinds of solutions. Maybe in a few years you'll write a book about what you've learned and how you learned it. How emotions are made. This one's my favorite right now. This person talks about neurology, and I just drink that stuff up. And I have to read her sentences 2 or 3 times before I move on to the next sentence. Because she's not only speaking way over my head, but some of her writing is very grammatically and I think intellectually precise. And so it's not as conversational sometimes. And so it's like, I got to go back over what she says because I really want to get to understand what she's alluding to. The terms she uses, sometimes there just are 5 or 6 terms for the same thing, or the same part of the brain, or the same process in the brain. But I'm going to tell you, her bottom line, some of her bottom lines so far from what I understand is A, emotions aren't universal, are not universal across cultures in the sense that everybody knows what it feels like to be verklempt or to have schadenfreude or to be angry or to be what's one that's really I don't know. So anyway, the emotions that you think that translate into other people's cultures, it's not like they have more words for their emotions than they do. Some of our emotions they don't have words for. So what that means is that your brain is constantly working. It's not triggered by the environment to turn on. That's another thing. It is constantly working and predicting and what ifing and making interpretations of the world around you. And that's most of the data that creates your current perception of what you see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Did I get yeah? And of what's going on inside your body emotional system. So most of what you perceived is shaped by memories assembled into expectations and predictions about your immediate future. It's turned into a present sense of your state. And yes, you are taking information that will modify that. That's why magic tricks work on you. That's why you mishear what people say and think you heard what they say. But actually, what you're looking at is not physically what you think it looks like unless you get really good at slowing down and taking in the immediate data and folding it into the data that your brain is creating. We will call it data, but the story your brain is constantly creating. I'm going to add to your brain that there's a book called Your Body is Your Unconscious Mind, and I really believe that concept is lost in the literature. A lot of psychological stuff is being processed by every cell in your body in various ways. So when I talk about your brain, I mean your brain and body system. Anyway, this tells you that you may not even really, we are interpreting and creating what we think our emotions are. And this book seems to speak to that. There have been some studies in the past. For example, if you put someone in a cold room and you put another person in a warm room, and they do that with 50 people randomized, the random selection of which room they go into. This person goes into a cooled room, this person goes into a nice warm room, and they both watch a horror movie, and they both, uh, this group tends to, and they don't go in, anyway, this group tends to think of the horror movie as less scary than this group. And it seems it's because this group is interpreting unconsciously their shivering as a sign of fear when it's patently because this room is colder than this room. So there you go. I'm just trying to loosen up your mind about how reality works and our perception of reality works. This one's interesting. It's called How Psychology Works, and it's created by a bunch of people. They don't really have a list of authors. They have like an editor. It's called How Psychology Works, and if you look at it, it almost looks like a For Dummies book or an 8th grade or high school psychology book. Whatever. It's not completely without use. I found that it has a really neat a summary of the concept of attachment style. Attachment style goes like this. Your interactions with your primary caregivers as a child started to form your ways of attaching to people based on what worked with them and what didn't work with them. And there are several kinds, and they affect your relationship with people right now. So neat. So what do I want to talk about today? Well, that was good. I recommend all those books to some degree. Again, you can read them and tell me what you think in the comments below, but I'm not sure I'll ever read those comments below. But at least you can read other people's comments about it. So how long ago did I start this? About 17 minutes ago. This is about the length of most of my videos. I had intended to eventually make a video about an implicit, well, not implicit learning, procedural memory versus episodic memory. So I don't know if it's appropriate to do it now, but I'm going to probably, if I'm going to go ahead and do it, I'll do about 2 minutes on it, right? So I've been going for 18 minutes and 24 seconds. What I'm going to say about implicit, this has to do with implicit learning. That's why I keep messing up. There are two kinds of learning or memory in one formulation that are very different than each other. There's something called procedural memory, and there's something called episodic memory. Now, episodic memory is probably the one we talk about all the time. It's, I remember this happening, I remember that happening, I remember doing this a long time ago, I remember that doing that a long time ago. Episodic memory is memory of what happened, what I did, a story from the past, and that sort of thing. One thing about episodic memory is it's not necessarily accurate or a pure recording of what happened, but it's the best your brain can do to remember what happened. And the only reason it's the best, it's not completely, yeah, I heard what I said there. It's the best memory, not a perfect memory of what happened, is because for you to do the best job in life, you don't need to remember exactly how things went all the time. Now, some things that you remember very, very well, probably because you lean toward that, but sometimes it's because you repeated that memory over and over again when it happened. So in some ways, you can remember facts like school facts because you studied them very hard in the moment. You might be able to remember the exact wording of a definition of something, and so that's kind of procedural memory. I'm sorry, episodic memory. I think at that point, when you start to remember, say, a speech, it's both. It overlaps with episodic memory into procedural memory because procedural memory, we're on procedural memory now, is how to do something, but you don't remember it up here because procedural memories are too complicated and too, we need to be able to do them very fast and habit-like for them to be doing what they need to do for us. So, for example, riding a bicycle. You don't sit there and repeat the steps to yourself after you've learned to ride a bicycle. You basically don't and you can't. You learn so many minute behaviors to balance yourself on that bicycle. So many minute muscular instructions that they are not remembered the same way. They are stored into procedural memory and you do them basically automatically. In fact, procedural memories are hard to not do. Notice how I'm going much over the time that I predicted. Procedural memories are when you juggle. There was a time when I practiced juggling all the time, and I couldn't drop a ball in a sense when I was alert and not too tired. And in fact, even when I was very tired, I could not drop a ball because my hand would go to do what it needs to do. The book, by the way, How Emotions Are Made, talks about that process. There's a part of you that just has your mind, your hand grab the ball, and you only realize the intention to not drop that ball a split second later. So that is procedural memory. And that is where a lot of your frustration is because you've learned your childhood training so well that it's happening faster than you can consciously decide to do something. And by the way, if you've learned sort of how to do something in an episodic way, oh, now I need to do this and now I need to do that, but you've learned that a different way procedurally, you're going to know how to manage your emotions kind of in a slow, intentional, highly conscious way. And you're still going to have to learn how to teach this procedural part the new way. And it's going to be frustrating. There is, I think, a book called I Know What to Do, but I can't get myself to do it. So again, those are two parts of your mind that really have to learn to get to know each other as buddies. This one has to become more tolerant of this one's slow pace of learning. And this one has to, if it can pay attention to the new information that this conscious part of your brain is like really trying to be patient about teaching you. So, and I'm not saying that this part can't teach this part either. So what I'm saying is that the part of you that's trying to learn how to deal with your emotions, my advice, slow down, tolerate the emotions, tolerate your worst internal crap, including the mental habits. By the way, you learn cognitive behaviors, explanations, and storytelling in a procedural way after a while. And that's why it's so hard to stop your negative thinking. So your sort of episodic mind, the one that's trying to understand what's what's really going on right now, has to tolerate that the data it's receiving is partly from your external environment, and a ton of it is coming in from your internal environment. And it has to tolerate that it's going to be a while before your internal environment learns the immediate, right now, actual observed lesson that you're trying to help it learn. So, fighting your emotions and fighting your negative thinking is not going to actually do the trick as much. In fact, there's something called rational emotive behavior therapy, which is a form of cognitive behavior therapy, where you try to train yourself in new ways of thinking. There are other types of therapy where people will try to teach you how to be happy in the moment. And I think you're going to have a lot of frustration and maybe want to give up unless you learn to allow all those things you're trying to unlearn. You're going to have a lot more luck if you let those lessons take time, and if you sit down and do a form of meditation in which you are aware and breathing through and trying to tolerate some of this stuff that you just wish wasn't coming up in the moment. I think that's it. I'll have to figure out what to title this. Thank you.